You know, in 40 years of sitting on this bench, I've faced down some of the angriest, most volatile people you can imagine. I've had defendants scream at me, threaten me, curse me out in ways that would make your grandmother faint. But I never, not once in 4 decades, thought I'd have a gun pointed at my head in my own courtroom. Let me tell you what happened that day, because this is a story about power, corruption, and what happens when someone who's used to being untouchable finally meets the law they thought they were above. But before I get into this whole story, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share with you is something that shows you exactly what happens when the justice system actually works the way it's supposed to. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of this. I've been a municipal court judge in Providence, Rhode Island since 1985. That's 40 years of seeing every kind of person walk through those doors. 40 years of CEOs and construction workers, teachers and teenagers, good people who made mistakes and bad people who thought they'd never get caught. Every morning I wake up at 5:30. I make my coffee strong and black, no sugar, just the way my father taught me when I was a girl. My father came to this country from Italy with nothing but $8 in his pocket and a dream that his children would have opportunities he never had. He worked construction his entire life, breaking his back so I could go to college, so I could go to law school, so I could sit on this bench. And he taught me something I've never forgotten. He said, when you have power over people, that's when your character is tested. The more powerful they are, the more important it is that you treat them exactly the same as everyone else. I get to the courthouse every morning at 8:15 sharp. My clerk, Christina, has been with me for 23 years, and she knows my routine better than I do. She has my case files organized on my desk. She knows I need those first few minutes with my coffee to center myself before I put on the robe, and she can read my mood just by the way I walk through the door. That Thursday morning, October 7th, I remember walking in and feeling something off in the air. Christina looked up when I came in, and her face was tight with worry. She didn't say good morning like she usually did. She just said, "Judge, we might have a problem today." I set down my coffee and asked her what was going on. She handed me a file and I saw the name on it. Chief Robert Dalton, Providence Police Department. I'd heard the name before. Everyone in Providence had. Dalton had been police chief for 15 years. He was a fixture at city council meetings, a regular on the local news, always ready with a sound bite about being tough on crime and protecting the community. But I'd also heard the whispers, the complaints that mysteriously disappeared, the officers who spoke up about corruption and suddenly found themselves transferred to the worst shifts in the worst neighborhoods, the evidence that went missing from the locker, the families who claimed their loved ones were beaten during arrests but could never get anyone to investigate. I looked at Christina and asked what he was being charged with. She took a breath and said, obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and witness intimidation. I felt my eyebrows go up. These weren't traffic violations. These were serious charges that could send someone to prison. I asked her to give me the details, and what she told me made my blood run cold. According to the charges, Chief Dalton had been running a protection racket out of the police department for at least 5 years. Local businesses were paying him cash to avoid citations, to get preferential treatment, to make their competitors' problems a priority. If you paid, your business was safe. If you didn't pay, suddenly the health inspector was finding violations, fire marshals were writing you up, police were constantly parked outside your establishment scaring away customers. But it got worse. 3 months earlier, a young officer named Marcus Rivera had started documenting what he was seeing. He kept records of the cash payments, the threats, the way cases were being manipulated. He built a file that could bring down not just Dalton, but 6 other officers who were in on the scheme. And then Officer Rivera was found beaten nearly to death in an alley behind a bar. No witnesses came forward. No security cameras seemed to be working that night. The official story was that he'd been jumped by unknown assailants. But Rivera told his wife from his hospital bed that it was a message, that Dalton had sent people to silence him. Rivera's wife, Elena, was the one who finally went to the state attorney general. She brought the files Marcus had hidden. She brought bank statements showing deposits that didn't match Dalton's salary. She brought testimony from business owners who were too afraid to speak up before, but who couldn't stay silent after seeing a good man nearly killed for trying to do the right thing. The Attorney General's office investigated for 2 months. And when they had everything they needed, they brought charges. Today was Dalton's arraignment. Today he would stand before me and enter a plea. I sat at my desk reading through the file, and I felt that familiar anger building in my chest. Not the hot, explosive kind, the cold, focused kind that comes from seeing someone abuse the trust placed in them. Dalton had sworn an oath to protect and serve. He'd been given a badge and a gun and the public's trust, and he'd used all of it to line his pockets and intimidate good people. Christina came back in and said, "Judge, there's something else you should know. Dalton's been calling in favors all morning. He's got 3 city councilmen in the gallery. He's got the mayor's chief of staff. He's got reporters from every news station in the state. He wants to make a show of this." I looked up at her and said, "Then we'll give him a show, the kind where justice actually happens." At 9 o'clock, I walked into my courtroom. It was packed. Every seat was filled, and people were standing along the back wall. I saw exactly what Christina had described: suits and ties in the front rows, people with power and connections, all there to support Dalton, to intimidate me, to show that he was still untouchable. And there, sitting in the defendant's chair with his lawyer beside him, was Chief Robert Dalton himself. He was a big man, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders and a thick neck. He wore his dress uniform covered in medals and commendations. His face was set in the expression of contempt, like this was all beneath him, like having to answer to a judge was an insult to his dignity. I sat down at my bench and looked out at the courtroom. I could feel the tension. This wasn't just an arraignment, this was a test. Everyone in that room was watching to see if I would be intimidated, if I would show deference to a man with power and connections, if I would be one more person who let Robert Dalton do whatever he wanted because fighting him was too hard. I picked up the file and began. I said, "The court calls the matter of State versus Robert Dalton. Chief Dalton, you are charged with multiple counts of obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and witness intimidation. How do you plead?" His lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, started to stand up. But Dalton put a hand on his arm and stood up himself. He looked at me with eyes that were hard and cold, and he said, "Not guilty, Your Honor. And I'd like to say for the record that these charges are a politically motivated witch hunt designed to destroy a man who's dedicated his life to this city." I kept my face neutral. I said, "Your plea has been noted. We'll now discuss the matter of bail." That's when things started to go wrong. The prosecutor, a young woman from the Attorney General's office named Sarah Chen, stood up and said, "Your Honor, given the serious nature of these charges and the defendant's access to police resources and personnel, the state requests that bail be set at $500,000. I saw Dalton's face flush red. His lawyer jumped up and said, "Your Honor, that's outrageous. Chief Dalton has deep roots in this community. He's a public servant with an exemplary record. He's not a flight risk." I looked at the file again. I looked at the charges. I looked at the evidence of witness intimidation of a police officer beaten nearly to death, and I made my decision. I said, bail is set at $500,000, cash or bond. The defendant is ordered to surrender his passport and any firearms in his possession. He is not to have any contact with witnesses in this case or with any member of the Providence Police Department except through his attorney. The courtroom erupted. Dalton's supporters started shouting. His lawyer was protesting loudly, and Dalton himself stood there, his face turning from red to purple, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. And then he did something that froze everyone in that courtroom. He reached inside his uniform jacket and pulled out a gun, a service weapon, standard police issue. He pointed it directly at me and said, "You don't get to do this to me. Do you understand? I run this city. I've protected this city for 15 years, and I'm not going to let some judge on a power trip destroy everything I've built." The courtroom went silent. I mean silent. You could hear people breathing. You could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Every eye was on that gun, on Dalton's finger on the trigger, on me sitting behind my bench. I've been asked 1,000 times since then what went through my mind in that moment, and the truth is, I thought about my father. I thought about what he taught me about power and character. I thought about Marcus Rivera lying in a hospital bed, beaten for trying to do the right thing. I thought about all the people Dalton had intimidated over the years, all the times he'd used fear and violence to get his way. And I thought, not this time, not in my courtroom. I looked directly at Robert Dalton, at this man pointing a gun at my head, and I said in the calmest voice I could manage, "Chief Dalton, you need to put that weapon down right now. You're only making things worse for yourself." He laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. He said, "Worse? You just set my bail at $500,000. You're trying to destroy my life. How much worse can it get?" I kept my eyes on his, not on the gun. I said, "It can get a lot worse. Right now, you're charged with corruption, serious charges, but charges you can fight. The moment you pulled that gun, you committed aggravated assault on a judge in open court. That's mandatory prison time. Put the gun down and you can still walk out of here today if you make bail. Keep pointing it at me and you'll be in handcuffs before you reach the door." I saw something flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe, or the beginning realization of just how badly he'd miscalculated, but he didn't lower the gun. He said, You think I'm afraid of handcuffs? You think I'm afraid of you?" I said, "I think you're a man who's used to being in control. I think you're a man who's used to people backing down when you threaten them. But I'm not backing down. You can shoot me if you want. There are 50 witnesses in this room who will testify to what happened. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Or you can put that gun down and you can face these charges like a man instead of a coward." The seconds stretched out. I watched Dalton's hand shake slightly. I watched the sweat start to bead on his forehead. And I watched the exact moment he realized he'd lost. He'd built his career on intimidation, on making people afraid. But I wasn't afraid. Or if I wasn't showing it. And without fear, he had no power over me. Behind him, I saw my bailiff, Tom, moving carefully along the wall. Tom was a former Marine, quiet and steady. He'd worked in my courtroom for 15 years, and I trusted him completely. I kept talking, keeping Dalton's attention on me. I said, "You dedicated your life to this city, Robert. You said it yourself. Don't throw all that away because you're angry. Don't make your wife visit you in prison. Don't make your children grow up with a father who's serving life for murder. Put the gun down." And in that moment, Tom moved. Fast and efficient, he grabbed Dalton's wrist, twisted the gun away, and had him on the ground in seconds. Other officers who'd been standing in the back rushed forward. Within 30 seconds, Robert Dalton was on his stomach, hands cuffed behind his back, that gun lying on the floor 3 feet away. The courtroom erupted again, but this time it was different. It was shock and relief and disbelief all mixed together. People were crying, people were hugging each other, and I just sat there, my hands gripping the edge of my bench, trying to keep them from shaking. I brought my gavel down hard, once, twice, 3 times until the room quieted. I said, "Chief Robert Dalton, you are now charged with aggravated assault on a judicial officer, terroristic threats, and unlawful possession of a firearm in a courthouse. Your bail is revoked. You will be remanded to county lockup pending trial. Officers, remove him from my courtroom." They hauled Dalton to his feet, and as they walked him past my bench, he looked at me one more time. The contempt was gone, the arrogance was gone. In its place was something like disbelief, like he still couldn't quite process that someone had finally said no to him. I watched them take him out. I watched his supporters sit there in stunned silence. I watched Sarah Chen, the prosecutor, wiping tears from her eyes. And I thought about Officer Rivera, about Elena Rivera, who'd found the courage to come forward, about all the business owners who'd paid protection money because they were too afraid to fight back. This was for them. This was justice. Look, I need to tell you something. If this story is resonating with you, if you believe that no one is above the law, I need you to share this. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the other stories I'm going to share. Leave me a comment telling me what you think. Would you have been able to stay calm with a gun pointed at you? How would you have handled it? The trial came 3 months later. Dalton's fancy lawyers tried everything. They tried to get the charges dismissed. They tried to get me recused from any future proceedings. They tried to claim Dalton had been under stress, that he wasn't thinking clearly, that he never intended to hurt anyone. But the jury didn't buy it. They saw the video from the courtroom camera. They heard from 50 witnesses who saw him pull that gun. They heard about the corruption, the protection racket, the beating of Officer Rivera, and after 2 weeks of testimony, they came back with a verdict: guilty on all counts. The sentencing was handled by another judge, as is proper when you're a victim of the crime. Dalton got 15 years. With the federal corruption charges that followed, he'll likely die in prison. Officer Marcus Rivera recovered from his injuries. He couldn't go back to active duty, but he became an advocate for police reform, traveling the country to speak about corruption and the importance of holding bad officers accountable. He came to visit me about a year after the trial. We sat in my chambers and he thanked me. He said I'd given him back his faith that the system could work. I told him the same thing I'm telling you now. The system only works when people have the courage to stand up to bullies and tyrants, no matter how powerful they are. It only works when we refuse to be intimidated. It only works when we remember that the law applies to everyone equally, from the poorest citizen to the police chief himself. I've been on this bench for 40 years because I believe something simple. We're all equal before the law, every single one of us. Rich or poor, powerful or powerless. And when someone forgets that, when someone thinks their badge or their connections put them above the rules, that's when people like me have to remind them that's what justice looks like. Not perfect, not always pretty, but fair, firm, and equal. Thank you for listening to my story. If you want to hear more incredible stories from my courtroom, check out the next video on your screen. Hit that like button and subscribe. And remember, take care of each other. Stand up for what's right. Show courage when it matters most. God bless you.